Hey guys, today we're going to make a Mastodon inspired track and it's going to sound like this. Alright, so that's what we're going to create, and I've really been reflecting a lot recently on just how much this band has shaped me as a musician. So I wanted to make this video, I guess, almost as like a tribute to my favorite guitarist of all time, RIP Brent Hinds. With that being said, let's jump in. And straight away, if I think Mastodon intro, I just see Brent doing all this crazy stuff. Brent had that crazy, almost banjo-like approach to playing guitar, so I want to focus on getting that sound down for our intro before we get heavy. And I'm going to start with this fairly low gain tone. We'll get into all the tone stuff later on, but for now, let's just lay something down. Alright, so I'm using this orange amp by Audio Assault. I know that Brent liked to use orange amps, so I tried this, and I think it's pretty close to the Mastodon sound. I've got it on the clean setting and pretty low gain so that we're retaining that clarity in the notes. Mastodon loves these crazy legato guitar parts with like ringing out strings and dissonant clashes, so to retain the clarity and everything that's going on, we have to keep this kind of low gain. And we have some effects on this to get some of that psychedelic kind of Blood Mountain vibe. So I'm keeping things simple, just using stock effects in Cubase, so we have a little bit of a phaser just at 6% mix. Then a flanger, I'm kind of pairing those two together to just get that kind of psychedelic kind of vibe. And then a little bit of rotary, like a Leslie speaker kind of effect. This is something Mastodon has used quite a lot throughout their career, and I feel like it's kind of flown under the radar, but a lot of their songs have this vibe, so that starts us off, but then I'm going to layer this higher gain tone with that. Bill loves Friedman amps, so I tried this Brainworks BE100 and it sounds great to me. And we have quite a lot of gain, which I know goes against what I just said about the note clarity, but the thing is, we're still getting the clarity from the main track. So this is kind of adding that layer in the background with more distortion, more of a metal sound without killing that clarity that we've created with the other track. And this one just has a stock phaser on it as well, so it just has some of that psychedelic vibe. And before we move on from guitars for now, I want to add one more background layer that's just going to be another kind of psychedelic crack the sky type of thing. Let's just add some soulful bends. So this time it's a flanger, a ping pong delay, and a rotary speaker again. Like I said, we'll get into tones a little more later on, but right now I just want to build out this intro. And before these guitars even start, I feel like the most Mastodon thing we could do is lay down like a nice syncopated ride. Make these super, super quiet. We'll make these kind of quiet. So we'll properly dive into drums in a minute as well, but for now, for that ride cymbal, the main key is just all that room reverb. Just making it atmospheric. That already sounds so Mastodon to me. Okay, and something Troy loves to do is use a little bass wah where it's tasteful, and I feel like the intro is going to be the place to do that. So again, keeping it simple with stock plugins, I just have this wah in front of my amp. So let's automate this to get the kind of vibe that we want. We'll bring it in there. And let's like sweep it up like this. Paste it a couple of times. Let's try that. I can already feel my beard growing. And we can make that even more all-out Mastodon because I have a gong. I found the sample online. I of course named it MASTODON. And I'm going to layer this every time that bass note comes in so that we get this huge so Mastodon. All right, and let's step up what the drums are doing. So I'm going to keep the ride cymbals going and just turn them up a little bit. And then between the ride hits, let's add a little like kind of ride hi-hat action like this. Just on the in-between notes. This is like a very prog, I feel like very Brandaler thing to do. And we'll keep these nice and low as well. And let's also throw a kick, a really quiet kick under every one of these too. So it'll be like kind of jazzy almost. Okay, and right at the end of the intro here, I want to start stepping things up with some fast drum fills. Let's do it. Let's go for 30-second notes. Something like this. Maybe like some really textured ghost notes. That is so ready to get heavy now. All right, and the final thing before this intro is as Mastodon as we can make it. We're gonna need one of these. I'm thinking the wolf is loose. Sick. All right, that's what it needed. Now let's get heavy. And I want to start by adding some crazy drum parts. Mastodon have their locked in chuggy moments, but they also have the wild, crazy, fast moments. That's what I want to do here. So let's go for like some pounding kicks. Maybe like an offbeat snare rhythm. Maybe like this. Couple of ghost notes on the snare, of course, for the feel. And of course, we end the measure with a little bit of this. Let's start with a big crash and then let's use the ride bell. Maybe a hi-hat. And for this, I'm actually using the Mixwave Gojira kit. I've found this thing can actually get a very Mastodon sound if you just leave it kind of dry and don't process it too heavily, so I'm really trying to preserve an organic, natural sound here. So the kick, we just have a little bit of decapitator, adding some vintage kind of grit to it. And on the snare, we have the same thing again. I'm finding myself gravitating to decapitator because it's more of like a vintage tape and tube saturator than just a distortion. It almost sounds like an old tape machine or something. You know, I want to make this sound a bit vintage and classic, so that helps. And I'm pretty heavily EQing this snare as well, just getting some of that ringing mid-range out of it, because as you're going to see in a minute, we're going to need a lot of space in this mix for mid-range, so I'm carving a lot of that out of the snare. And even though that's only 2 plugins, let me show you what these are doing for our snare if I turn them off and then on. And on the toms, it's very important that we leave it natural sounding, so I just have 1 EQ, but it is an important EQ, so I'm losing all the top end slap and some high mid-range slap, and then this stuff here, which I usually nearly always cut on toms, I'm completely leaving alone because we want to hear these booming and ringing out with that tribal Mastodon kind of sound. We really don't want to make them sound too modern, so losing that top end gives us a bit more of that kind of 70s vibe in the toms. And let's lay down a crazy Mastodon riff over this. Sometimes these guys can explore a whole scale or multiple scales in one riff. They can throw a whole load of different guitar tricks into one riff. So I'm going to try to do all of that, and then we'll talk about tones. Let's do it. Same thing on the right. So I'm kind of throwing everything at that riff. I'm starting by kind of running up and down the minor scale, which Mastodon loves to do. Adding a little dissonance there with that major 7th. And from there onwards, I'm going into the double harmonic major scale, which if you don't know, is a huge key to Mastodon sound. All of this stuff. All double harmonic major, also known as the Arabic scale, and It's a very weird sound, very uniquely Mastodon. Not a lot of bands use this scale. And the reason that it sounds so awesome and so weird is because it's basically a major scale, but with a flattened second and a flattened sixth, which basically means that half sounds really pretty and half sounds absolutely demonic and evil, which is Mastodon, right? They have these beautiful chords, beautiful melodic choruses. And then they have these pure, evil, brutal riffs alongside them, so it all makes sense with this scale. And as far as tones here, I'm trying to stay mostly authentic to what the band themselves uses. Bill seems to play Friedman amps more than anything else. He has his own Friedman amp, so I'm using this BE100 again, and I can see why he loves these things, because it sounds awesome. And I'm using this impulse within the plugin, which I believe is a Mesa Boogie. And in front of that, I'm using the SS11X plugin for this Greed Smasher distortion pedal. This is based on a Grid Slammer, which as far as I know, Bill doesn't actually use, but I just tried a bunch of things and this sounded spot on to me. Listen if I switch that off. And on. You can hear that just tightens everything up and gives it that bite that we need. And after the Friedman, I have this EQ doing the opposite of what I nearly always do. I'm boosting a load of mid-range, and if we go back to the amp, check this out. I've got the mids like nearly full. Mastodon don't tend to go for like a super modern crisp sound with all the mids scooped out. They like that classic 70s kind of mid-rangey sound, so I'm boosting lots of mids, both on the amp and with the EQ. That's where all the fullness is, all the warmth. So definitely important that we nail the mids. And after the EQ, I have some fresh air to get a really crisp top end. And again, just a tiny bit of decapitator. If you listen especially to Leviathan and Blood Mountain, the guitars have like this crisp, tapey saturation on them that is definitely not just amp distortion, it's whatever analog consoles or whatever they were recording through, adding that old school grit, which just sounds so good on guitars. Alright, so that was the Bill tone. Here's my Brent tone. So I'm of course using a JCM 800. I think he used these more than anything else. And especially if you want that kind of vintage, crack the sky kind of tone, which I love. This just has that vibe. So this is another Audio Assault plugin. And again, look at these mids. Doing the same thing, and I'm doing the same kind of thing with EQ again. Just getting the 70s kind of vibe. I know that Brent very often used Ibanez Tube Screamers, so we have one of these just as a boost in front of the amp. I'm using these cabs and mics here. And again, doing the same trick we did with the Decapitator after the amp, but this time I'm using the Ampex tape machine just to get a slightly different color of vintage flavor. Hopefully you can hear that even though it's a subtle difference, it's so important for getting that kind of vintage sound. And even though these are plugins, I just think this thing and Decapitator are so good that no one would tell. Like, it just sounds so vintage. We then have a little fresh air again, just bringing the top end alive a little more, and that is my Bill and Brent tones. That's one of the many things that makes me just love this band so much. The kind of thrashy, sludgy tones from Bill. And then the more classic rock sound from Brent, it just goes so perfectly together. And we're not done yet. Let's lay down some bass guitar, and it's kind of going to sit in the background here, but it's still going to be a huge tone. And later on, we're really going to let the bass shine. Alright, this tone. So I'm starting with an Ampeg SVT. Troy loves a good SVT. And again, look at the mid-range and the bass. I'm keeping the treble kind of low because even though Troy's tone is absolutely monstrous, it definitely sits back behind the guitars. So I'm giving them plenty of space and just making the bass this giant bass monster. And in front of the amp, I'm using a Big Muff by Audiority. Troy's tone can range anywhere from kind of classic rock to all-out insane fuzz distortion. And to me, the blown-out fuzz is kind of the quintessential Troy Sanders tone. You know, Remission, Leviathan, just the ridiculous distortion. So a little bit of this. I also have a pretty dramatic EQ here after the amp, just making sure the low end doesn't get too crazy in some places, and just losing some harsh mid-range. And after that, I'm using both Decapitator and Tape by Baby Audio. Both of these are just to get that vintage character, because especially with the Remission Leviathan bass tone, I hear so much like tapey saturation. And remember, we turned down the treble on the amp because that's what I'm hearing in their music, but I do hear some top end, and I think it's coming from this kind of saturation. If you listen to this off and on, if you know that early Mastodon tone, you'll probably recognize this. It's not necessarily the prettiest sound on its own, but as Troy himself described the tone,
it's a gnarly, giant, hairy, dirty, thick sound.
I feel like we're achieving that here. And after our wild technical Mastodon riff, let's lay down some slower pummeling stuff so we can really let the bass shine through the mix a little more. Let's go for like a Colony of Birchman kind of thing, like straight kicks, snares, and a crash going onto the hi-hats. Of course, at the end, we're going to want some fills. So maybe try some 16th note triplets, and then like getting up faster to some 32nd note toms. Yes. Let's take that even further now with some more percussion as well. These guys love the bells and whistles, the shakers, tambourines and stuff. Let's see if we can add some things. So this is just the mixed percussion kit in Cubase. Okay, definitely want that guy, and let's try and add some like human feel to the dynamics. Yeah, something like that. Maybe slightly alter the timing, just so that they're not perfectly on the grid and it has some kind of human feel to it. Same thing with this tambourine. And somewhere in this kit, there's a triangle. There we go. Let's try that. It's in the background, but it steps things up and just gets the mix moving a little more. All right, let's put a nasty riff on this. All right, let's get the bass down, and after this, we're going to go for one huge stomping final riff, like Mastodon likes to do. Put the heaviest riff at the end. Let's get this down first. So we'll go for something kind of simple. I mean, we're talking about Mastodon, so it's not going to be that simple, but ghost notes again. Maybe we just keep the crashes going this time. No, I think that should be the hats, and let's have some quiet hits in between. More crazy fills at the end of the measure, of course. And let's kind of humanize them a little bit, make it sound a little more real. And let's just keep the shaker going here. This is like Mastodon's secret weapon. They sprinkle this stuff all throughout their songs, and half the time you don't even notice it, but you feel it. So I'm going to keep it in the double harmonic major. Usually the heaviest Mastodon riffs are in that scale. Let's lay it down. I just went for the all-out tribal stuff at the end there. Gotta do it somewhere. And I've got the highest two strings ringing out over the chords there. Something Mastodon loves to do. Let's get it on the right. So I'm throwing some major thirds on top of these chords, some minor thirds, fourths. Mastodon is one band that isn't afraid to add a little harmony in metal. Like, they love expanding up on a power chord and just adding this extra flavor, a little dissonance. So I'm making sure I throw some of that in there. Okay, and this type of huge, slower riff where there's more space in the mix is where Troy's bass really gets to shine. So let's lay this down. Okay, and finally, we've got to throw a little synth in there. Mastodon's experimented quite a bit with synths, especially on Crack the Sky, The Hunter, and Emperor of Sand. It's rarely anything super crazy, usually just like one note that they'll use as a psychedelic texture. So I've put together a sound in Vital that to me is just like the Mastodon synth sound. Got some pulse width modulation, some filter automation. So let's just bring this in on the second repetition of the riff here. Okay guys, and for me, that completes it. We have here what I think could almost pass as a legit Mastodon track. I think we've captured all the key elements here that make up this incredible band's sound. In a minute, we'll listen through the full thing. If you've enjoyed this video, please consider hitting the like and subscribe if you want more content like this. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Here's the track.